In Budapest, there's a nice supply, there's a nice mix of houses and apartments, and there's plenty, there's no shortage. So assignees can expect to see a good, maybe 8 to 10 houses or 10 to 12 apartments on a typical home search. And there's a nice mix of furnished and unfurnished as well. There are a lot of furnished apartments. Furnished houses are a little bit more rare to come by. And there's an interesting split in Budapest. People that don't have children or have small children generally tend to live on the Pest side, which is more city center living with easy access to shops and cafes. And families with children live on the Buda side, which is more green and hilly and suburban, and that's where the houses usually are. And that also provides them easy access to the international schools. One thing that's useful for people to know, especially people coming from the US, is that most of the houses, there are some newer houses, but whether they're new or not, closets are not so common. Usually people will be keeping their clothes and items in wardrobes, so it's a big thing to get used to. You can have a big bedroom but no closet. So that's the same is true for apartments as well. It's just not as much stuff, I guess, that people have, so not as many closets, so people use wardrobes. There's a perception, I think, that's slowly starting to fade, but I think it still exists to a certain degree that Central and Eastern Europe, the former communist countries, Hungary included, of course, rents are cheap. And people tend to be surprised that rents are sometimes more than they might expect when they move to Hungary or the surrounding countries. And really, part of the reason is locals don't rent at the level that expatriates do. So the properties that are at expatriate standard are really for expatriates, and the landlords know that, and they charge what they feel they're worth, because there's no competition from locals to rent those same properties. So some people are surprised that rents are a little higher than they thought going in. Not outrageous, but higher than they might have anticipated. The housing market, remember, communism ended in the late 80s. And so, but before that, there were 40 years or 45 years of no private ownership, which had a real influence on the property market. And nobody owned a property, so nobody really necessarily maintained it. And so, especially with apartment buildings, it's not uncommon for the building itself to be in somewhat neglected condition, and yet have an expatriate renting a very nicely renovated apartment in this building where the plaster might not be, might be peeling a little bit on the outside of the building, or the elevator might be a little bit old. So sometimes people are surprised. You take them into a building and they think, oh, this building's not so nice, and they have to get to the apartment before they realize that the individual unit has been renovated, whereas the people who are owners in the building overall don't necessarily have the resources to repair the entire building. So that's not unusual. And the other impact that communism had so that's to deal with apartments, but on housing, on houses, if you get out in the suburbs, because in theory everybody was equal and you might have a factory worker living next to a government minister, where we all might be used to neighborhoods where the houses are very similar. In a place like Budapest, it's very mixed. You can get up in the Buda hills, then you can have a beautiful 19th century country manor that was somebody's vacation home when they wanted to get away from the city, and then right next door there's a communist-era apartment building with 16 units. And so you can go down the street, and then the next house down might be a brand new build that an entrepreneurial owner built on a lot. And so the neighborhoods are very mixed, and people can be put off by that, but they just have to understand that's the market, that's the reality. It's not what they're used to, and it's part of what gives the city its character. There's actually a good number of international schools in Budapest. There's a British school, a French, an American, and a German. There's also an Austrian because of the proximity to Austria. And some other nationalities have smaller schools or language programs. In general, there are not huge issues with availability, but especially at the younger grades, sometimes year to year there could be lack of space in the second grade or lack of space in the kindergarten. So it's worth it to check. Something else that's worth noting is because this is a place where expatriates have only been coming for maximum 20 and more like 10 or 15 years on a regular basis, all the schools are very nice. They're modern facilities, they're brand new, the standards are very high. They're really impressive facilities, and the kids seem to enjoy them a lot. They have a lot to offer. Budapest, generally, it depends on where you live. If people live on the Pest side, like I mentioned, Pest is more city living. Throughout the city, actually, there's fantastic public transportation. There's subways, trams, buses, And so it's easy to get around on public transportation. And because parking can be challenging in the older historical Pest side of the city, it is certainly possible to live without a car. You can get just about anywhere you want. The trains and everything run on time. On the other side, on the Buda side, again, which is the suburban area where the houses are and close to the international schools, a car is a requirement. And traffic, although not terrible, is definitely difficult during the rush hour times. You know, you're coming from Buda, most people would be working in Pest, and so that means crossing the river. So you have a few bridges and a few main routes into the Pest side, which can create a traffic problem. But all in all, it's not a nightmare like, you know, some of the bigger cities in Europe. And driving is generally safe and easy. People pick it up. There's no huge adjustment to learn how to drive in Budapest. Most expats moving to Hungary or to Budapest will take advantage of a handful of 3 or 4 really nice high-end Western standard private medical clinics. And these clinics will have a number of in-house specialists so that they can get most things done. And then if there's something that requires a more advanced facility or hospital, a lot of times they'll send a translator or somebody along to a state-run hospital. The state-run hospitals are terrific as far as they do have the latest equipment. The physicians are experts and they're excellent at what they do. I think what people find surprising is the facilities are not, you know, they're older and not so well maintained. So they might be put off by the facility itself, but as far as the level of treatment, it's excellent. But again, that would be an emergency situation. In most cases, people would be going to the expat clinics, which are situated near where expatriates live, so there's usually easy access for everybody. One thing that's worth knowing about housing and about neighborhoods, again, because of the way communism impacted the housing market and because there are no gentrified sort of neighborhoods where people of similar income level are all living together. It's a very mixed city. It's not unusual to find graffiti in the nicest parts of the city, you know, the most desirable parts to live. And people sometimes see that and think, oh, graffiti, this means the neighborhood's not safe, or would I really want to live here? You just simply can't make that judgment in a place like Budapest. I lived in a wonderful building 2 blocks from the parliament and yet still had, you know, some graffiti on the building. It's just a fact of life, and it might be unusual to see it at first, but you get used to it and eventually becomes part of the character of the city itself. As far as culture, the one thing that certainly there are different nuances that people will pick up, but the one thing that's probably worth highlighting, depending on where somebody's coming from, is customer service hasn't advanced to a great degree in Hungary yet. It's certainly improving year on year, but it's not unusual to go to a store and have the lady at the deli counter continue to sharpen or clean the knife she's been cleaning, because clearly that's more important than turning around and getting you the cheese or the ham that you're waiting for. So you have those types of issues which can be irritating at times, but go with the territory. And then as far as language, Hungarian is, it's a very challenging language to learn. Certainly, like any international assignment, there's value in making an effort and learning at least the basics, and I know Hungarians absolutely appreciate that. But at the same time, it is possible to get by without learning the language. And there are more and more people are speaking English and learning English. I think people above 35 probably learned Russian or German in school, but the younger generations who have learned English and definitely would like to have the chance to use it. So you can get by without it, but I'd encourage people to learn it. A separate point on culture that I learned the hard way, it was interesting, especially if you're going to be in a work environment, is people expect you to say good morning when you get to the office. And I made the mistake of, when I started working, the first few days or weeks, just walking straight to my desk and not saying anything. And it got to the point where people were saying good morning as I went by. So people greet each other when they arrive, and they greet each other when they leave the office. Even if it's not somebody you necessarily work with, it's still expected that you'll say hello or goodbye. And if you don't, it's considered rude, actually. In fact, people even say goodbye when they get out of elevators to total strangers. So just something to keep in mind. Greetings are important, even in situations where it might not be natural or normal to you. As far as tips for somebody relocating to Hungary, or more specifically to Budapest, first of all, I would really encourage everybody to take an orientation tour if at all possible. 2 main reasons. Seeing the housing, it can help you eliminate certain neighborhoods or certain areas or certain types of housing and make the actual home search more efficient and useful. And then second of all, visiting the schools and the medical centers and getting to know the town in general can go a long way to answering questions and reducing anxiety about the move overall. So it's absolutely very helpful. I would encourage people, second of all, to check with availability. If you have school-age children, check availability at the schools, just to avoid any last-minute surprises. Third, I mentioned it before, but don't be put off by the fact that the city's a little bit rough around the edges. You know, the impacts of communism are still visible, and it's part of what gives the city its character. So I would encourage people to just go with the flow and take that in and recognize that it's part of what makes the city unique. And then lastly, I'd say have fun. Budapest is a wonderful expatriate destination. There's a nice standard of living. You get to live in the capital of you get European capital living and ability to live near the close to the Parliament or close to the Opera House, which might not be possible in a place like London or Paris. Most people really enjoy their assignments, so have fun.